कुंज बिहारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन। यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन। यमुना तीरा वनचारी। यमुना तीरा वनचारी। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन। यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन। यमुना तीरा वनचारी। यमुना तीरा वनचारी। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे। हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे। हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे। हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So we are going to discuss verse 10.32 today. Let's start with the prayers. So you can repeat after me. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurue Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamaiham Tadati Swapadantikam वंदेहम श्रीगुरु श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातां सहगना रघुनाथान्वितां तां सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्ण चैतन्यदेवं श्री राधा कृष्ण पदान् सहगना ललिता श्री विशाखान्वितांश्च हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी श्री राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृष्णभानुसुते देवे प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। टुगेदर हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। Can somebody tell what page number is this in the new book?
450.
450. Okay, this is page number 450. Okay, so we are going to recite this verse. I'll read, so we can read like one line each. So I'll read the line and you can repeat after me. Sarganam adirantascha madhyaham chaivam arjuna adhyatma vidya vidyanam vadah pravadatam aham सर्गानामादिरन्तश्च मध्यम चैवाहम अर्जुना अध्यात्मविद्या विद्यानां वादः प्रवदतामहं सर्गानामादिरन्तश्च मध्यम चैवाहम अहम् अध्यात्मविद्या विद्यानां वादः प्रवदतामहम्. Someone would like to recite the verse? Sarganamadhirantascha madhyam chāvāham arjuna adhyatma vidya vidyanam vadah pravadatamaham. Someone else? Mataji would like to recite? Okay, I think I'll recite one last time and then we'll move on to the synonyms. Sarganamadirantascha madhyam chaivaham arjuna adhyatma vidya vidyanam Vadah pravadatamaham. Sarganam, of all creations. Adihi, the beginning. Antaha, end. Cha, and. Madhyam, middle. Cha, also. Eva, certainly. Aham, I am. Arjuna, O Arjuna. Adhyatma Vidya, spiritual knowledge. Vidyanam, of all education. Vadaha, the natural conclusion. Pravadatam, of arguments. Aham, I am. Translation: of all creations, I am the beginning and the end and also the middle, O Arjuna. Of all sciences, I am the spiritual science of the self, and among logicians, I am the conclusive truth. I'm going to read the purport. Among the created manifestations, the first is the creation of the total material elements. As explained before, the cosmic manifestation is created and conducted by Mahavishnu, Garbhodakshay Vishnu and Kshirodakshay Vishnu. And then again it is annihilated by Lord Shiva. Brahma is a secondary creator. So I just want to quickly clarify that Brahma is described as a secondary creator here because the first creation happens through the agency of Lord Mahavishnu. So we know that Mahavishnu, from his body, different universes come out. Then Mahavishnu actually expands himself into the Mahavishnu is also known as Karanadakshay Vishnu. He expands himself as Garbhodakshay Vishnu. So Garbhodakshay Vishnu enters into every universe, and from his navel that lotus comes out, from which Lord Brahma is born. And then so why is Kshirodakshay Vishnu talked about here? Because in each universe, when all these agents of creation, maintenance and annihilation are incarnations of material qualities of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, he is the beginning, the middle and the end of all creation. So what does it mean? He is the beginning, middle and the end. So universe starts from him. So he is the original seed from which everything comes out. Then that is the beginning. Then in the middle, he sustains, he maintains everything, because and then finally everything is annihilated. So by his will, everything is annihilated. So he is the beginning, he is the middle, and he is the end of the universe. For advanced education, there are various kinds of books of knowledge, such as the 4 Vedas, their 6 supplements, the Vedanta Sutra, books of logic, books of religiosity and the Puranas. So altogether there are 14 divisions of books of education. Of these, the book which present Adhyatma Vidya, spiritual knowledge in particular, the Vedanta Sutra, represents Krishna. So out of all the education, actually Krishna also describes this in the 9th chapter. The name of the chapter is, what is the name of the 9th chapter? No, the 9th chapter. Knowledge. Most confidential knowledge. You looked at the introduction. Yeah. So it's the most confidential knowledge, the highest knowledge. So what is the highest knowledge actually? It is the knowledge about absolute truth. So that is the ultimate knowledge that everybody should get. So that is what Krishna says, I am. I am the Adhyatma Vidya. Among logicians, there are different kinds of argument. Supporting one's argument with evidence that also supports the opposing side is called jalpa. Merely trying to defeat one's opponent is called vitanda. But the actual conclusion is called vada. This conclusive truth is a representation of Krishna. Now this word vada is a little sometimes confusing. So we can't say that everything is a vad. Now what vada means is, so there is Mayavad, there is Vedvad, so there are different philosophies which so Vedavad is also a philosophy, Mayavad is a philosophy. So we may say that, okay, is every philosophy Vada? No, that is not true, because when we ask some people, what is your philosophy? So they may say that, oh, my philosophy is to eat, drink and be merry. That is my philosophy. So is that Vad? No, that is not Vad. So Vada, what it means is, when something is presented systematically, there is like a very thorough understanding, philosophical discussions about that particular philosophy. Now there could be some arguments against that philosophy. So then the refutations are presented systematically. Okay, this is the argument, this is the refutation. This is the argument, this is the refutation. So then it becomes Vad. So if we see Mayavad is such a philosophy where, Madhvacharya had very rigorously opposed the philosophy of Mayavad. But what the Mayavadis do is they oppose the logics presented by Madhvacharya. So they would write big books about, so this is what Madhvacharya said against Mayavad and this is our refutation of that. So basically Mayavad then becomes Vad. So this is what Vad means. Okay, so on this verse, I'll just repeat the translation one more time. Of all creations, I am the beginning and the end and also the middle, O Arjuna. Of all sciences, I am the spiritual science of the self, and among logicians, I am the conclusive truth. So we had discussed it last time, actually, when I gave a class earlier this month. Last month, I'm sorry, in February. So we had discussed about why Krishna is talking about his glories here. So we see that almost in the entire chapter, Krishna is describing his glories. So we discussed why Krishna is discussing his glories. So I'm not going to repeat all of that. But just to give a hint, a little idea about it. So in the 10th chapter, there is the Chaturshloki Bhagavad Gita that comes. So after Krishna speaks the Chaturshloki, we discussed the 4 verses last time when I was giving the class, but after Krishna speaks those 4 verses, the Chaturshloki, Arjuna actually accepts everything that Krishna had said. So he actually speaks beautiful prayers glorifying Krishna, and then he asks Krishna that, oh Krishna, I'm not satiated by hearing your glories, I want to hear more, please tell me more about you. And then he says, please tell me in detail. So Krishna says, actually there is no end to my glory itself. So if I speak in length, if I speak in detail, it will never end. So I'll just tell you very few important, the most important glories. So the word that he uses, pradhanataha, the most important ones. So then he starts speaking about himself. So actually, he is speaking about his opulences. So why is... So let us try to understand some of his opulences. So why do we need to hear about Lord Krishna's opulences? So the word Bhagwan is explained by different acharyas in different ways. Now there are 2 words, Bhagwan and Bhagyavan. So now the word Vana means the possessor, and the word Bhaga means opulences. So one who is the possessor of opulences, he is Bhagwan. Okay. Now the acharyas have explained that actually there are many people in this world who have some opulences. Okay. But is it true that all of them are Bhagavan? No, that is not true, because one of the defining characteristic of Bhagavan is that he possesses all the opulences in full. So there may be someone who is rich in this world. He can be the most richest person of the world. He is the richest person. But does it mean that he has all the wealth in this world? No. So we can say Krishna actually he owns everything. In that sense, he actually is not just the most richest person. He is the only richest person of the universe. So in that sense, Bhagwan is the possessor of all the opulences in full. That is the meaning of the word Bhagwan. And the scriptures describe that one who knows Bhagwan, he actually becomes Bhagyavan. So what does it mean he becomes Bhagyavan? He becomes extremely fortunate. And what is his fortune? Krishna actually describes to this effect in Bhagavad Gita in 4.9. He says, Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tattvataha tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti so Arjuna. He says, my appearance and my activities are transcendental, divyam, and one who actually knows about it in truth, tattvataha, he will not return to this material world. And where will he go? He will come back to me, to my spiritual abode. So that is what Krishna says. So that is the real fortune, knowing Krishna in truth, tattvataha. So we may say, okay, no, there are so many. I have watched the Ramanand Sagar's Krishna and Mahabharat, and I have seen the Little Krishna movie that is there it's there on YouTube, and then I have read so many comics about Krishna. So I know about Krishna, I know about God. So does that mean that we know Krishna? Yes, that is knowing Krishna at one level, but the real knowledge is not just informational knowledge. The real knowledge is transformational. So what does it mean it is transformational? It basically helps us transform the innermost desires of our heart, the innermost love of our heart from the things of this world to Krishna. If the innermost desires and love of our heart, it turns towards Krishna, then that knowledge becomes transformational. So when does that happen? When we know Krishna in truth, when we know him tattvataha. What was tattvataha? Means the philosophical truth, the real truth. Philosophy, generally people take the word philosophy to mean that, okay, there could be many philosophies. So actually the real philosophy is the real nature of the truth, the real nature of something. That is the real meaning of the word philosophy. So in effect, there is only one philosophy that is 100% true. So when we know the philosophical truth about Krishna, then we will be able. So there is also this verse that comes in Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says in the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that when my devotees know about me, it's in the 10th chapter actually. He says that when the devotee really knows me, he has no alternative left. He just naturally performs devotional service towards me. So there is no alternative left. So now Acharya has described that actually there are 6 opulences. And most of us would know what those 6 opulences are. So anyone would like to mention what those 6 opulences are? I'm sorry? Wealth, beauty, knowledge, renunciation.
He said
Fame. Strength, yes. So these are the 6 opulences. There are many other opulences, but they can be characterized under these 6 main opulences. Okay. So let us try to understand how Krishna actually manifests these opulences when he performs his pastimes. So there is a very famous devotee of Lord Krishna. His name is Kulishekar Maharaj. He has written a very celebrated set of prayers. That is, we also have it in our temple store. It's called the Mukundamala Stotra. So you might have seen that book. Sometimes it's there right in the front on the table. So in that book, Kulishekar Maharaj actually describes that this Lord is not an ordinary Lord. He has a very unique characteristics. He possesses all the opulences, but he also shares his opulences with others. He shares his abode with others, and he also shares his opulences with the people who serve him, and sometimes even people who do not serve him. So we'll see how Krishna actually manifests all of these opulences. And he also shares it with his devotees, and sometimes he even makes apparently he will make it appear that his devotees have these opulences more than Krishna. Okay, so let's see. So let's first talk about the first opulence is knowledge. So knowledge. Before that, when we talked about these 6 opulences, so we may say that, okay, I want to be knowledgeable, I want to be strong, I want to be influential, I want to be famous. But renunciation is not something that is generally would be considered as an opulence. How many people would like to be renounced? Anyone here would like to be renounced? You? Okay. So why is renunciation considered as an opulence? So Acharya has described that renunciation may not be specifically attractive. So we may not want to renounce, but we want the fruit of renunciation. And what is the fruit of renunciation? It is peace, shanti. In 12.12, Krishna says that Tyagat Shantim Anantaram, he says. So from renunciation comes peace. So in that sense, renunciation can be considered as an opulence. And we'll see how Krishna also manifests this opulence of renunciation. But first, let's talk about knowledge. So knowledge, now Krishna, it is said he is omniscient. He knows everything. And then he also makes his statements to that effect in Bhagavad Gita 7.26. He says, Vedaham samtitani vartamani cha arjuna bhavishyani cha bhutani mam tu vedna kaschana. Thank you, Mataji. So he says, bhavishyani cha bhutani. I know past, present and future. But mam tu vedna kaschana. Me, no one knows. So he says, I know everything about everybody. He says, I know everybody and I know their future, their past and their present. So Krishna's knowledge is not like an ordinary knowledge. Sometimes we see in these quizzes where we have this Kaun Banega Crorepati knowledge. People, they have such amazing knowledge. There are these trivias where some random questions will be asked to them. Okay, how many sons did this particular actress had? Some random question. And this person would know the answer. And then if someone would win that quiz, we'll say, how this person has so much knowledge, So everybody likes people who have knowledge. So now Krishna, in that sense, he knows everybody and he knows them at all times. And he knows everything that they have done. He knows everybody and he knows everything. So sometimes we see these magazines which are available in the stores. They in the cover they will write, there's some particular thing that have happened and they say the inside story. So nobody knows about this, but we are giving you the inside story. So Krishna, in that sense, he knows the inside story of everybody. Why? Because he is inside us. He is present as Paramatma. So in that sense, he is sitting at the most strategically advantageous position. He actually sees what we are doing and he also knows our innermost desires. What are our real intentions? What are our desires? But he does not uses that omniscience to catch us. To catch us means when we commit some mistakes, he's not there to, just sitting there just to catch, oh, you did this mistake, now I have caught you. No. He uses his omniscience to coach others. He uses his omniscience to bring the best out of others. So in the Vishnu Sahasranam, there are two names of Vishnu that are placed next to each other and they are oxymoronic. So the names are Animisha and Nimisha. So Animisha means one who does not blink his eyes. And Nimisha means one who blinks his eyes. So these names sound oxymoronic, means they sound contradictory. One who does not blink his eyes ever and one who blinks his eyes. So in our Sampradaya, there is Baldev Vidyabhushan, who is a great Acharya. He has written a sub-commentary over Vishnu Sahasranam. So he describes that what is this, the meaning of Animisha and Nimisha. So he says that when some devotee performs even the minutest, smallest service, the Lord watches that service without blinking his eyes. He takes a note of that service without blinking. Even a smallest service someone would have performed. So we see in Ramayana when this squirrel was trying to help Lord Ram by bringing dust particles and helping the bridge, build a bridge. So at that time, Lord Hanuman thought that, she is creating a nuisance, she is coming in my way. But Lord Ram pointed out that what she is doing is, so Lord Ram did not just notice it, he also pointed out to Lord Hanuman that what she is doing is very significant, at her caliber what she is doing. So he watches every single service that he never neglects and he never forgets, So there is this pastime in Mahabharata where Arjuna and Krishna, they are talking to each other, and at that time Draupadi comes and she brings some fruits for Krishna. So then she notices that Lord Krishna and Arjuna, they are actually talking very intimately. So she starts leaving from there. And Krishna, he picks up a fruit and then he starts peeling the fruit. And so the knife, it falls from his hand and then it accidentally cuts his finger. So the blood starts oozing out of his finger. And then Draupadi, she was alarmed and she runs over there and she was trying to figure out what to do. So what she did is she ripped out his sari and then she banded Krishna's hand. Now the skeptics might say that, okay, we say that Krishna's body is transcendental. So how could blood come out of his hand, So if his body is made up of flesh and blood, then it cannot be transcendental. So Jiva Goswami describes in his, I'm digressing a little bit from the main theme, but Jiva Goswami describes that Krishna actually performs many different leelas. So one of the leela that he performs, it is called Asur Mohan Leela. Now what is Asur Mohan Leela? He also says that in the Mahabharata we see that Krishna, when the Yadus have killed each other, all the Yadus have died. So and then the Dwarka is going to be inundated by ocean, and then Arjuna he sees that the ocean has started rising already. So Krishna actually had left his body behind. He left the planet, but he has left his body behind, and Arjuna actually does the last rites for Krishna and Balaram. So Jiva Goswami describes that actually how could Krishna leave his body behind? If his body is transcendental, he could have taken the body shouldn't have been there. So he says that these leelas are Asur Mohan Leela. No, the Asuras want to believe that Krishna is not God. He is just an ordinary human being. And just to satisfy them, and just to make them continue their illusion, he leaves his body behind so that they can continue to think that Krishna is just an ordinary person. So like that he does many such leelas throughout his stay on the material world. So what Draupadi did is she just banded his Krishna's hand with her sari, and Krishna actually sees that Draupadi, I will never forget this and I will repay you. And how did Krishna repay it? He repaid it in the Asat Sabha when Draupadi was being disrobed. So let us talk about so we don't have time much to discuss in detail. There are many such pastimes about Krishna's omniscience. Let's discuss about renunciation, because that is something that a lot of people do not understand. Actually, Prabhupada was also many times challenged about this. So, and then we see that whenever the principles of Krishna consciousness are challenged, Prabhupada was rarely on the defensive. He was mostly on the offensive side. So once there's this Christian priest who came to Prabhupada, and then he said that how could you worship this Krishna as God, because this Krishna is so lusty. He had 16,108 queens and he had thousands of girlfriends. How could he be God? So Prabhupada said that, okay, what is your definition of God? So this Christian priest said that the God is the greatest. So then Prabhupada said that if God is the greatest, then he should be, if he's unlimited, he should be unlimitedly lusty. And why only 16,000 wives? He should have, unlimited number of wives and unlimited number of girlfriends. So now this priest was a little shocked to hear this response. He was not expecting that kind of a response. So later Prabhupada explained that actually Krishna, when he acts, he is not immoral. So there are three. We have immorality and we have morality. So Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur describes that we need morality because we have selfish desires. So he says that if all of us are selfish, so when there is dark, he says, so he uses an example, he uses a metaphor. When there is dark, we need a torch to walk. If we do not have a torch, we won't be able to walk in the dark. So the moral principles are like walking with a torch in the dark. But when it's daytime, when the sun has arisen, at that time we don't need torch. So like that, when Krishna himself is present, he is like that sun. He does not need morality. So in that sense, Krishna is neither moral, he is neither immoral. He is beyond the definitions of morality and immorality. He is actually transmoral. So what he is doing is, he is simply reciprocating love with his devotees. He has no selfish desires. He is simply reciprocating love. So there is this pastime of we see in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Ras Leela. So there are 5 chapters in which the Ras Leela is described, chapters 29th to 34, I believe, in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So there we see that when Krishna calls all the gopis by playing his flute. So when the gopis had come, so just when they were about to perform Ras Leela at that time, so it is described in Bhagavatam that the gopis had become a little proud. They thought that, okay, we are so fortunate that Krishna is with us and he's dancing with us here. So they became a little proud, and then Krishna could not tolerate that his devotees have become proud, so he left. So now Kavi Karnapur, he had appeared in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. He had written a book which has become one of a very celebrated books. It's Anand Vrindavan Champu. So he gives the inside story over there. So he says that actually the gopis did not become, so they did become proud externally, but what they were thinking internally is, they thought that actually Radharani is the supreme gopi. She has the most amount of love among all the gopis. So they wanted to glorify Radharani. So they apparently became proud because Krishna does not like his devotees to become proud. So that Krishna would leave them and then he would be alone with Radharani. So Krishna, what he did is, he actually left all the gopis and then he went alone with Radharani deep inside the forest. So Prabhupada writes in his purport that actually this is how Krishna demonstrates his renunciation. There are such beautiful ladies which are there who have come to meet Krishna in the middle of the night, and Krishna actually abandoned all of them. So that in that sense, Krishna, he is self-satisfied. He does not need anybody. So in that sense, he is renounced. And then we see in the Ras Leela that he also leaves Radharani and he disappears. So Radharani is also devastated. So Radharani actually, apparently she becomes proud because she thinks that, okay, Krishna is alone with me and all my sakhis, all the other gopis, they would be alone frantically looking for Krishna here and there. So she could not tolerate that she is alone enjoying the company of Krishna. So she wanted the gopis to catch up with them so that they can also enjoy the company of Krishna. But Krishna understood Radharani's plan. So he disappeared from there. He also left Radharani alone. Later in the Ras Leela, Krishna does come back, but that's not the point of discussion. So we see that not only Krishna is renounced, but his devotees also are renounced. So the gopis wanted to renounce Krishna for the sake of Radharani, and the Radharani wanted to renounce Krishna for the sake of the gopis. So even the gopis are renounced in that sense, and Radharani is also renounced. Let's talk about the next opulence, which is fame. So now there are many different famous people in this world, but Krishna's fame is unique in the sense that he is famous throughout the universe. There is this in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. It is described the various different planets of the universe, the Kim Purusha Loka, the Brahma Loka, so many Swarga Loka, and then it is described that how the inhabitants of different lokas, they are worshipping Krishna or one of his manifestations in different ways. So his fame is spread all over the world, or not just all over the world, all over the universe, and not just all over the universe, in all the universes basically. So now we might say that, okay, there are so many people in this world who do not know about Krishna. Actually, we can't say that now because Prabhupada had left, he had spread Krishna's fame almost all over the world, and almost everybody would have heard about Hare Krishnas. They have become so famous because of Srila Prabhupada. But still, even like we can say that before Srila Prabhupada had appeared, Many people did not knew about Krishna. So actually, now Kali Yuga is such a time when that is the characteristic of Kali Yuga. It covers the knowledge about God. So in the vastness of the time scale, Kali Yuga is just a very tiny little spot in the vastness of time, the eternal time. And even if we take the four cycles, the Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapar Yuga and Kali Yuga is the shortest Yuga. Kali Yuga consists of 432,000 years, and even bigger than Kali Yuga is Dwapar, bigger than Dwapar is Treta, and bigger than Treta is the Satya Yuga. So Kali Yuga is just like a tiny dot in the vastness of time. So in this dark age, which is Kali Yuga, if some people do not know about Krishna, that is not Krishna's loss. That is the loss of those people that they don't know about Krishna. So in that sense, Krishna, and even if we talk about, people may not know about Krishna as the person God, but they have some abstract idea about God, abstract concept about God. They do worship God in some way or the other. So in that sense, God's glory, God's fame is spread even in this world all over. We may say that there are atheists, so they just deny, but they do know about the concept of God. Okay? Why God? What is the concept of God? They are aware about the concept of God. Okay? So let's talk about the next opulence, which is, so we have discussed renunciation, we have discussed fame. Let's talk about strength. Okay, so strength. Now Krishna, when he desires, he can manifest unlimited amount of strength. We see in the Govardhan Lila, he has picked up like a big hill. And how did he pick it up? On the pinky of his left hand. So when he lifts the Govardhan, it is described in the Vedas. I'm going a little fast because we are running out of time now. It is described in the Vedas that Indra is the most powerful god. Now Indra's strength, it is described that when he throws the thunderbolt, even the mountains would be, they would be crushed to powder. So now Krishna had ordered his servants to go and inundate Vrindavan with water and destroy Vrindavan basically. So his servants had tried their best. So they have inundated Vrindavan with heavy rains, and then Indra sends some of his messengers to go and check what has happened to Vrindavan. So they go and they come back to Indra, and then they tell Indra that actually nothing has been destroyed. All the Brajvasis are enjoying below the Govardhan hill. So Indra at first couldn't understand what does it mean below Govardhan. So he says that how did suddenly Govardhan Parvat had manifested wings, that it is flying. So then the messenger said actually Govardhan is not flying, Krishna has lifted the hill. So Indra couldn't believe it, and he went himself to check what exactly had happened. So what Krishna demonstrated to sometimes when we fight with others, we have some argument with others. So we may say that, in India we say that tu mere baएं हाथ का खेल है. What does it mean? No, I can dismiss you with my left hand. The left hand is considered a little weak. Right hand is considered as a little stronger. So when we say someone, it's like an insult to that person. So what did Krishna tell Indra? That I can dismiss you not just with my left hand, not just with the pinky, with just a nail of the pinky of the left hand. So there is this poem that एक दिन मान इंद्र को मारो नख ऊपर गोवर्धन धारो. Nakh ऊपर, nakh means it's just a nail. So he lifted the Govardhan hill on his nail of the left hand, the pinky of the left hand. So now the skeptics would say that, okay, how could Krishna lift, or someone would lift Govardhan hill? How could Krishna find the center of gravity of Govardhan? And then after finding the center of gravity, how could he balance everything on the center of gravity? So Krishna do not have to find the center of gravity because he is the source of gravity. Whenever he wants, he can suspend the laws of gravity. So in that sense, so we also see, so this is just one pastime about his strength. We'll just quickly talk about the other pastime. It is the wrestling match that has happened in the arena of Mathura. So Kansa had invited Krishna to fight the best of his wrestlers. So Krishna and Balaram both go over there, and then within few minutes, Krishna actually had not just defeated but delivered all the wrestlers of the, the Mushti, Chanur, the best of the wrestlers. These are like the better than what we have today, WWF and WWE, whatever we have. So these wrestlers were better than those wrestlers, and they were the best wrestlers. Nobody could have defeated them. So Krishna within minutes he defeated all of them and killed them. So, and after killing them, so Kamsa was stunned to see that all his wrestlers have been killed. And then what Krishna did is he invited the Gopas. They were watching the wrestling match as spectators. So he invited the Gopas to come to the arena and wrestle. So all the Gopa boys, they jumped into the wrestling arena, and then they first danced, and then after that they wrestled with Krishna. And when they wrestled with Krishna, each time Krishna was defeated by the Gopa boys. So this Kamsa, he was intellectually short-circuited. How could my best of my wrestlers were defeated by Krishna, and now these Gopa boys, nobody even knows about them. They are coming and defeating Krishna, and Krishna was fighting earnestly with these Gopa boys, and still he was getting defeated. So now Krishna could manifest unlimited strength when he wants, and whenever he wants, he can conceal that strength. So we know that Kamsa after that was killed by Krishna, and that pastime had ended over there. But let's quickly talk about the next opulence. I want to leave some time for questions. So we discussed about strength. Now let's quickly talk about the wealth. So Krishna is all, we say that all the wealth in this world belongs to Krishna. Now we may say that, okay, how is it possible? My house belongs to me, his house belongs to him. So how is it Krishna's house? So now we may say that is true, that our house belongs to us, but it belongs to us, but for how long would it belong to us? Sooner or later we'll have to give away all our possessions. So, and we, in the Krishna's pastime, in the Dwarka, we see that unlimited opulence was manifested in Dwarka. So it is described in, even in Mahabharata, it is described even in Bhagavatam, that when Krishna was present, so the assembly hall which they had, the Yadu assembly hall, actually Sudharma had come and he had designed that assembly hall, and it was extremely opulent. So all the kings were amazed to see how could someone. So Sudharma was we know who Sudharma is. Sudharma is one of the architects in the heavenly planets. So he is the counterpart of our Prakash Prabhu there. So I don't know, he's not here. He's here? Okay. So Sudharma is the counterpart of Prakash Prabhu in the heavenly planets. So he actually had designed the assembly hall of Krishna, and in the Bhagavatam it is described that it was not the fortune of Dwarka that Sudharma was present in Dwarka. It was the other way. It was the fortune of Sudharma to be present in Dwarka, because Dwarka is considered to be higher than even the Swargalokas. So it is described in the Bhagavatam that Krishna had 16,108 queens, and each of the queens had a magnificent palace, and all Krishna's relatives had their own palace. And it's not that the other residents of Dwarka were living in pigeonhole like apartments. They all have opulent houses. And how is all of that possible? It is how could there be so many palaces, so many opulent houses? So Krishna actually can expand space, he can expand time whenever he wants to. So in that sense, Krishna, whenever he wants to manifest wealth, he can manifest that. And we can say that, okay, in Vrindavan there was no wealth present, but that is how Krishna likes to live in Vrindavan. He likes to delight in simplicity in Vrindavan. So, but whenever required, he can manifest huge amount of wealth even in Vrindavan. So we have talked about wealth, and the last one is beauty. So beauty, it is in the throughout the history there are different poets who have written beautiful glorifications about Krishna's beauty. his form, they have glorified him. We can say that what can we talk about Krishna's beauty? Actually, in Rupa Goswami writes in one of his books, he talks about two kings. So they were devotees of Krishna, and they would write beautiful poetry glorifying Krishna's form. So once Krishna actually appeared in front of them, Krishna was very pleased with them, and he actually appeared in front of them. And when these two kings saw Krishna, they were stunned to see Krishna, and they said that, "My dear Lord, we thought that we were glorifying you, but we were actually insulting you. Why? Because you are like the emperor of this world, and we were glorifying you as the caretaker of some village." So that is what our glorification. So what can we say about your beauty? What can we say about your opulence? But still, the acharyas talk a lot about Krishna's form. They sometimes compare his complexion with a blackish blue rain cloud. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, we see in the 3rd canto, Kapil Dev actually describes the Lord's his own beauty. So he says that the Supreme Lord's eyebrow is curved. So he says that when the yogis, they meditate on each of the limbs of the Supreme Lord, then suppose they are meditating on the eyebrow of Krishna, then after that they won't find the eyebrow of any other person attractive in this world. Once they have meditated on the eyebrow of Krishna, like that, when they meditate on each of the limbs of Krishna, they cannot relish, or they cannot find any of the other people beauty attractive in this world. So they become a little disengaged from the beauty of this world. Let's quickly talk about the last point here. So we just have 5 more minutes remaining. I want to leave at least 2 minutes for questions. So we discussed the 6 opulences of Krishna with one pastime, but the most lovable aspect of Krishna's personality is not these 6 opulences, but his affection for the devotees. So we see the different pastimes that are described in Mahabharata and Srimad Bhagavatam. We know about how Krishna became the charioteer of Arjuna. So the acharyas describe that actually to become the charioteer of Arjuna was not an ordinary thing, because what happens is when these warriors, when they are fighting, so at times they will have to hold weapons from their mouth also. So when they are holding the weapons from their mouth, they won't be able to instruct their charioteer to move here, move there. So what they would do is they would kick the charioteers to drive them here or there. So then he says that actually this is the Supreme Lord, and then he was getting kicks from Arjuna, and not just kicks, he actually had to take so many weapons on him, whatever. So when a particular warrior would attack another warrior, the first thing that he would try to do is kill the charioteer of the other warrior, so that he becomes immobilized. When he is immobilized, it is easier to defeat that warrior. So actually, many people had tried to kill Krishna when he was on the battlefield. So he actually had so many, and we see in the 9th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, when Bhishma Dev is glorifying Krishna. So he actually says that, I want to meditate on Krishna's that form when blood was oozing out of his, of his forehead. So what it means is there were some weapons that had actually hit Krishna on the forehead, due to which blood was coming out from his forehead. So in that sense, it was not an ordinary pastime. But one of the allegations that people had about Krishna is that actually the most amount of love, Vrindavan Vasis actually had offered the most love to Krishna, and then Krishna actually left those Vrindavan Vasis. And not just left them, he did not come back to them ever again. So we know, so Jiva Goswami has written a book that is called Gopal Champu. So what Jiva Goswami does is, in Gopal Champu, he does something unique. So he takes the position of a spectator in Vrindavan, and then is describing all the different pastimes of Krishna as a spectator in Vrindavan. Now, how are the different pastimes of Krishna affecting the people in Vrindavan? How are the Vrindavan Vasis seeing the different pastimes of Krishna? So he says that actually Krishna had to leave Vrindavan because there was utter chaos in the whole world. Now, there were so many demonic personalities who were disrupting the the law and order in the world. So he had to go out of Vrindavan to maintain law and order in the entire world. So when he actually went out of Vrindavan, so they said, okay, Krishna did not come back ever, but Krishna did in fact come back. It may not be described in Bhagavatam, it may not be described in Mahabharata, but Krishna, it is described that after so we know that in when the Rajasuya sacrifice was performed, at that time there was a demon named Shalva who took the opportunity to attack Dwarka. So this was not an ordinary attack. So it is also described in Krishna book. So this was like an Air Force attack. So he has attacked from the sky. He had he had a Vimana. So from this Vimana he was kind of dropping some kinds of bombs on Dwarka. So Krishna actually at that time had to rush back to Dwarka. So when he rushed out to Dwarka, so Shishupal and Dantavakra at that time were very close. So before the Rajasuya sacrifice, they had met, and Dantavakra told Shishupal that I won't come to this assembly. You try to kill Krishna in this during this Rajasuya sacrifice, and for some reason if you miss out, then I will wait for Krishna in Mathura and I'll kill him over there. When Krishna had to go from Hastinapur to Dwarka, so he will have to go via Mathura. But when Krishna learnt about the attack that had happened in Dwarka, he rushed back to Dwarka before time, before it was expected that Krishna would go back. So Dantavakra heard the news that actually Shishupal had been killed. So he was very angry. So he immediately came to Mathura, and then he thought that I'm going to kill Krishna over there in Mathura. But Krishna has already passed from Mathura at that time. So he went to Dwarka, he defeated Shalva. So at that time, Narad Muni understood that the time for Dantavakra has come. So Narad Muni went to Dwarka and informed Krishna that Dantavakra is waiting for you. So Krishna had not planned to go to Dwarka at that time, but because Narad Muni told him that this Dantavakra is waiting for you, so Jiva Goswami described it was like a deer waiting for the lion to come, So Krishna went to Dwarka, and then he thought, now I'm going to Mathura, so I will go to Vrindavan after this, because Vrindavan is just next to Mathura. So he was in such a rush to go to Vrindavan that he could have killed Dantavakra in just one blow. But this Dantavakra had got many powers from Lord Shiva. So Krishna thought that if I just defeat him in one blow, it would be an insult to Lord Shiva. So at least some fight I will let him do. So he would let him do some fight, and after some time he killed Dantavakra. And then he took the opportunity and immediately went to Vrindavan. But before that, he actually went to Vishram Ghat. So Vishram Ghat, he actually gave up all his weapons. He says that in this incarnation, now no more weapons. Now I will let my devotees take up the weapons for me. So he gave up all his weapons, and it is described in the Gopal Champu that Vrindavan Vasis, what they would do is they would keep sending different messengers to find out how is Krishna doing. When Krishna was in Mathura, every day many different messengers would come and go from Mathura to Vrindavan. But when Krishna went to Dwarka, so they could not come every day, but Krishna arranged for fast horses so that these messengers could bring the different messages from Krishna and vice versa. So, and when wars would break out, at that time no messengers would be able to come. So when wars would break out, what the Vrindavan Vasis would do is they will offer charity. They will give away profuse amount of wealth in charity for the well-being of Krishna, and they would also perform austerity. So when Shalva had attacked Dwarka and Krishna was fighting Shalva at that time, practically all the wealth that Vrindavan Vasis had, they had given away all their wealth, except the jewels that Krishna had given them when Krishna had met them in Kurukshetra. So, but when Krishna was fighting with Dantavakra, the last piece of wealth that remained with them, they also gave that out in charity, just for the well-being of Krishna. So, people would pray to God, and Vrindavan Vasis would pray for God, not to God. That is their love for Krishna. So when Krishna was at Vishram Ghat, before that when he was in Dwarka, he had sent a message for the Vrindavan Vasis, because he did not anticipate that he would come back to Vrindavan so soon. So when this messenger had come, so everybody saw that this messenger had come, everybody assembled at a place, and this messenger was reading out this message from Krishna. So the message said that I am neither in Mathura and I am neither in Dwarka. I am in this letter, and if you just keep this letter near you, I will be forever there in your heart. And I have promised myself that I will return, and I had made Uddhava promise that I will come back, and I even made Balramji, my elder brother, promise that I will come back. So I can let my word go in vain, but I will never let Uddhava's and Balramji words go in vain. I will surely come back. Just wait for me and just be patient. So after that, so as they were hearing this message, they suddenly heard Krishna's conch shell being blown, Panchajanya. So they heard the sound of Panchajanya, and even though Krishna has never used Panchajanya in Vrindavan, but they knew the sound of Panchajanya. So they immediately became jubilant, and they rushed out to the outskirts of Vrindavan, and there they saw Krishna is there on the chariot. Along with Daruka was driving the chariot. So they jubilantly started dancing and welcoming Krishna. I'm just rushing now. So they invited Krishna inside Vrindavan, and so they would constantly watching the chariot, because one of the chariots had taken Krishna away from them, and now there is this other chariot. So Krishna told them, don't worry, this chariot is there to obey your commands. Tell me, what do you want? So before that, actually, Purnamasi, she told everyone that, Krishna defeated the whole world and then he came back to us. So Nanda Maharaj said that our victory is that Krishna defeated the world, but he left the world and he came back for us. So there is a beautiful reunion that is described there in this book, but I'm skipping all of that. So Krishna told them that, tell me, what is your wish? So they said that we don't want to be separate from you ever again. So Krishna turned to Daruka and told Daruka that arrange to let this chariot expand so much that all the Vrindavan Vasis could come on this chariot. So this chariot that Daruka was driving, it suddenly, mystically it started increasing in size, and it became so big, and it's not astonishing because in Srimad Bhagavatam also we see the pastime of Devahuti, where his husband had made a big plane as big as a city. So this chariot actually expanded in majestic proportions, and all the Vrindavan Vasis, they actually boarded this chariot, and then they came to the banks of Yamuna, and then the spectators were watching that such a big chariot had come, that it's like a city, whole Vrindavan is there on this chariot, and suddenly it disappeared from there, So it actually went to the spiritual world, and what Krishna did is he actually called. He arranged for Lord Balram, Uddhava and Mother Rohini to come and join them so that they all can go back to the spiritual world. And then Krishna actually, Jiva Goswami describes that Krishna arranged for the expansions of Balram, Rohini and Uddhava to go back to Dwarka so that they can continue their pastimes. So in that sense, Krishna did actually come back, and then he took all the Vrindavan Vasis back to the spiritual world with him. So I'll stop the class here. We are already past now. Just quickly, one question if somebody has, we can discuss it. Otherwise, we can close it.
So everybody abandoned Vrindavan. So what's the point of Vrindavan afterwards?
I'm sorry?
If everyone has left Vrindavan,
yes.
What's the point of it? Is it still spiritually charged? Is it still special? Is it still a place because there's no more people there?
Actually, the Acharyas have described that the Vrindavan that we see in this world, it is mystically connected to the Vrindavan in the spiritual world. It's just that we are not pure enough to see that mystical connection of the Vrindavan in this world, of the Vrindavan in the spiritual world. But it has that same potency that is there in the Vrindavan of the spiritual world. That is why all the pure devotees or even devotees, they want to leave their bodies in Vrindavan so that they can go back to the spiritual world, the Vrindavan in the spiritual world. So in that sense, yes, it is still spiritually charged as much as it was when Krishna was himself present in Vrindavan. He's still present. Actually, it is said that Krishna never leaves Vrindavan. It's just that we don't have the eyes to see Krishna. And that is not astonishing, because in the 11th chapter when Arjuna asked Krishna, I want to see your opulence, I want to see your Rupa and Aishwarya. So then Krishna says that Divyam dadami te chakshum pashyame yogam aishwaram. He says, I'm giving you divine eyes, so that you can see my opulences. So it's just that we don't have the eyes to see Krishna, and if we could have had the eyes, we could have seen Krishna. We can see from the eyes of the Acharyas. They can see Krishna in the Vrindavan of this world, and they can experience Krishna in the Vrindavan of this world. So we'll stop here. Thank you. Hare Krishna.